Well, UnknownCountry.com subscribers, welcome to another edition of Dreamland, free as always, and this one is just awesome. First, Maurice Cotterell has discovered something about the Terracotta warriors that is in China that you just are not going to believe. There was something amazing going on in this world in the distant past that we have forgotten, and boy, do we need to capture that thread now, because then later, when Linda talks about Dr. Dan Burish, a couple of things that he mentions that I can't say, that Linda and I both know, that have we kept dead secret all of these years. He also knows about the visitors, about their bodies, that you almost have to believe the guy has seen one. So it's quite an awesome interview. The sound quality is not great in the interview, and I apologize for that. It was taken in the field by a non-professional, not by Linda, in other words, and it shows. But listen closely. It is very, very worth hearing. It will be inconceivably the most extraordinary interview you've ever heard. And the amazing thing here is that the Terracotta Warriors story, the ancient Maya story of 2012, and what J-Rod is warning us about through Dr. Burish, all dovetail. They're the same thing. I mean, it's just brain-bending. So listen up, and there's no commercials in this. Do get the Terracotta Warriors, though, and there's a coupon for it, $1 off in the subscriber section. It's called Terracotta 1, and you can use it right now in the store, and it is well worth getting this book. It's a real mind expander. Also, something only people who subscribe to the free newsletter, and I have autographed 50 copies of The Key, and if you act immediately, you can get one. Of course, you get it at half price, $9.47, half off the list price. And there are just 50 copies more autographed. I'd autograph more, but I am running like a demon, as you may imagine, in the considerable wake of the day after tomorrow. There is a lot going on. A whole lot is going on. The world is changing to a degree because of that movie, and let's hope that the Climate Stewardship Act that's being reintroduced by John McCain and Joseph Lieberman passes this time, as it has now got a very good chance of doing so. We will save the world in which we live, and for future generations. Wait and see. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Let's go on and talk to Maurice Cotterell. Well, one of the most exciting names in literature is that of Maurice Cotterell. Maurice has written the Mayan prophecies, the Tutankhamun prophecies, the super gods. He has written the Lost Tomb of Viracocha. He has Coming Up, the Celtic Chronicles, which should be awesome. But today we're going to be talking about his latest and many ways most amazing book, because this time Maurice goes to China to do what? Well, to look at those amazing terracotta warriors. Remember, they were found a few years ago, 8,000 life-size statues of warriors from 2,000 years ago in ancient China. Now, why and how were they made, and what were they made for? Well, Maurice's interpretation of this is going to awe you. It is going to inspire you. It is going to open your eyes to some of the realities of our lost past that you have never considered before. It is an amazing, amazing story. Maurice, I'm tempted to just dive into it. That's all I can say. We're going to be talking about things like the secret science and lost science of the sun, and just all sorts of stuff. So, Maurice, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Whitley. It's good to be back again.
Well, it's always exciting to have you. Maurice, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's always exciting to have you, and I'm really looking forward to this. Why don't you begin by telling us what drew you to the Terracotta Warriors in the first place, because that in itself is a big surprise.
It is, Whitley, but as you were saying at the introduction, I've been very interested for many years in the super science of the sun. For me, it's a lifetime's work. And the ancient Chinese were one of the first civilizations to recognize the sunspot cycle and to catalogue the duration of sunspots on the surface of the sun. when I also started to realize that the ancient Mayas understood the superscience of the sun, how the sun affects life on Earth, how the 28-day spinning sun regulates estrogen and progesterone in females, and hence menstruation in females, how it affects determinative personality at conception through genetic mutations, and so on. Once I started to look at these ancient civilizations of the Mayas, the Peruvians, the Egyptians in a different way, then it all became clear as to why they worship the sun as the god of astrology, why they worship the sun as the god of fertility, and why they believe that the sun has massive cycles of 18,000 years duration, during which the earth is periodically destroyed over and over again. And they wrote down all of this very super science in their treasures to help us regain the knowledge in years to come, because they understood about the body and the soul, how the soul can go to heaven or reincarnate on earth. And so they figured, well, if we don't make it to heaven, we need to somehow grasp all this knowledge again if we ever do come back to earth. So why not write it down in our treasures? So they wrote it down, the Mayas wrote it down in their carvings, their jewelry, their architecture. The Egyptians wrote it down in their architecture, their pyramids. The Peruvians, again, left the same information. And as I began to inquire into these civilizations, I began to see common threads. For example, the leaders were known as feathered snakes. For example, Tutankhamun has the eagle and the vulture and the snake on his forehead. So he was a feathered snake to his people. Lord Paikal was known as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake. And of course, if we look at the Chinese, the leader of the Chinese, the first emperor of a unified China around 220 BC, Qin Shi Huangdi, his insignia was a dragon. Now, the dragon is a feathered snake and a stag. It's an amalgam of three creatures. And Lord Paikal in Mexico, as well as being known to his people as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake, he was also known as Xiaipitotec, the stag. And if we look at the pictures, if listeners have got access to the website, if they log into my website, then they'll actually see the animations.
Cotterell, his website is mauricecotterell.com.
What we'll see is, if you scroll down the page, you'll actually see the animations of some of these decoded pictures from my earlier works, how the Mayas encoded this very sophisticated information into their carvings. And they made sure it was difficult to access, difficult to decode, because the knowledge is very special. Not only does it relate to the superscience of the sun, but it also tells us about the higher orders of spirituality, why we live, why we die, what happens after the soul leaves the body, and what it's all about, what God is, what heaven is, what hell is. All the secrets have been left for us to decode. And they didn't wish us to decode this information before we were ready for it. And they made sure that we weren't ready until our technology told them that we would be ready. So they made sure that some of these messages could only be decoded using the latest technology, like computers and so on. And again, if you check the website, you'll see these amazing living miracles, which are right now unfolding over the last few years and telling us of what life's all about, why we've been born, and why we're here, and what will happen in the future.
I am actually doing this as we speak, and of course it's absolutely awesome because, you've got something, and it's so abundantly clear, and yet conventional Western archaeology, which is kind of mired down in Eurocentric thinking, in other words, by that I mean our archaeologists, without quite realizing what they're doing, assume that modern European and Western thought patterns are the most advanced that have ever been on the earth, and therefore that, for example, the animations I'm looking at right now on MauriceCotterell.com, which show clearly that it's no accident that these images appear as they do, would just be ascribed to chance.
The problem is, I think, with archaeologists is that they don't believe in the soul. That's the first thing, and this is why they have no. It doesn't concern them if they dig up dead bodies and take the jewelry off them. That for them, we are biological beings. We are just bodies. There is no soul when this life is over for them, and for them it might well be the case. that when this life is over, they cease to be. Now, all the civilizations of the world believe in reincarnation. Now, of course, some people will contest that. They'll say, oh, hang on a second. Christianity doesn't believe in reincarnation, but it's not true. It's a different way of looking at things. And if we start back with physics again, and astrophysics, what we realize, if we get back to Einstein's theory of relativity, where he puts forward the equation E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Once we start to examine all of this knowledge, we realize that in the beginning, if we look at the scriptures, there was light. The light, the energy converted into mass. The physical universe was created. And what that means is everything in the physical universe must be the opposite of the energy, because, going back to Einstein, if E equals mc squared, then if we take energy across the equation and convert it to mass, we have to change the sign of the mass. Simple rule of algebra. So if we have God, energy, and that's what we're told, God is light in all of the scriptures, then as God goes across that equation and created the physical universe, everything in the physical universe is the opposite of God. So everything in the physical universe must be the devil. Now, what that means is that we are living in hell. Now, that's not the end of the story. As we start to decode these ancient treasures, they tell us that when the fetus is in a womb, growing and the cells are dividing, it generates electrical currents and they generate voltages. And those voltages are opposite the voltage that created them. In other words, they're negative God, if you like, they're opposite. And what happens before the baby is born is that those voltages drag down another piece of godly energy. So the soul attaches to the baby. So
Maurice, at this point, at this incredible juncture when the soul is attaching to the baby, we have to take a brief break. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Maurice Cotterell at an extraordinary moment in the life of a human being. He was talking about the moment that a soul attaches to a baby and when we become human in the womb, a moment that was known and understood in the distant past but has been forgotten sadly by so many scientists. Maurice, just continue. This was just so awesome.
What happens then, as the ancients tell us, as we start to decode all of this information, and this is their information, of course, Whitley, not mine. I've simply decoded it and I've brought it forward to show everybody else in living pictures why we're here. Now, that human being grows up now with a soul and a body. The soul is godly energy. The body is the opposite of godly energy, and therefore it could be described as the devil. And so we have this battle going on within us at all times. There's a battle raging. And we're told about this in the Hindu texts, the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the epic poem, the Mahabharata. Now, in that poem, we have two armies assembled before the battle begins. And the young soldier, Arjuna, that's his name, he stands on the battlefield and he looks at the soldiers on the other side of the valley. And he drops his bow and arrow, and he's feeling quite despondent, and he says to God, what am I doing here on this battlefield? I don't want to fight this battle. I don't want to kill these people. There's some teachers of mine. There's some relatives of mine on the other side. You know, what is life all about? And then as though time stops, Krishna comes down and sits next to Arjuna, and he teaches him all about life. And he teaches him the difference between the body and the soul. And he says, in this life, it has been ordained that your past lives have determined that you are a soldier in this life as against a merchant or a teacher or a labourer. Therefore, it is your duty to go out into the battle. I've put you on the battlefield today, therefore you've got to go and fight. If you kill other people, don't be too concerned. Their souls will be released and they will be reborn. So you're not actually killing them, you're just releasing them for another chance of rebirth and another chance of spiritual redemption. If you win the battle, you'll be king of India, and if you lose the battle, you'll be a king in heaven. He then explains about the role of the senses, and he compares the senses to a team of 5 horses, and he compares the reins of the horses to the intellect, and the soul is the rider or the charioteer. And he says to Arjuna, don't allow the senses the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the touch, the taste, to carry you away, because desire will kill you. Desire leads to frustration, frustration to anger, anger to delusion, delusion to self-destruction of yourself and others. If you wish the soul to have a peaceful journey, then the intellect, the reins, must control the senses so that they don't run away with themselves. And if we go to the trenches in Xi'an with Qin Shi Huang Di, the same allegory that appears in the Bhagavad Gita appears in the tunnels of the underground warriors, whereby a whole battalion of 8,099 troops are assembled, waiting for the battle to begin. The charioteers are in formation. The horses are bridled and yoked and restrained. The soldiers are very peaceful because they don't seek hate, they seek love. And so here we have the same paradigm which occurs in other religions. Going back to the notion of reincarnation, the Christians believe that when we have a body and the soul in the same way, and that if we're good in this life, the soul goes to heaven. If we're bad, the soul goes to hell. Once we understand that this earth is hell, then of course Christianity recognizes reincarnation. Those who don't go to heaven reincarnate in hell, which is earth, which is this place we find ourselves in for 70 years. Now,
this is why nothing works here, could it?
Everything we do in this hell is frustrated, and it doesn't matter if we're rich or poor. And what we learn from the decoded messages, they tell us, just like the Bible, with the written words, the Bible tells us that many that are first will be last, and last will be first. And this is because, as Jesus said, if we love each other, the voltage of the soul gets higher and higher. So when the soul is released from the body, it goes back to God. And in this way, God grows. God becomes more voltage, and the universe grows. And that's how it's meant to be. It's a perpetual God growth. Mankind enables God to grow. If one person hates another, the soul of that person goes down. The voltage goes down. So when the soul is released from the body, it can't escape the magnetic field of the earth or the gravitational pull of the earth. So it looks for a body of a lower voltage than the previous body. So it comes back, and it's not as healthy, not as fit, not as intelligent. So
and
in the next life,
that would explain why there's this incredible decline going on, where people seem to be less and more people are more and more diminished with every generation, until now the planet is covered with a vast sea of almost helpless, desperate people, and only a very small number who are otherwise. Maurice, we're going to have to take just a little break here. This is among the most fascinating shows I've ever done. I'll tell you that right now. We'll be right back. This is Dreamland. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Maurice Cotterell talking about really some of the most basic truths of life in a way. He speaks with such knowledge and authority. And why? Because this is a man who has capably decoded this message from places all over the world, from Central America, South America, from Egypt, and now from China, and I think soon also from the Celtic tradition. So, Maurice, let's continue. And I would like to ask you a question, and I want to begin to get into this in relation to the changes that we see happening all around us right now. For example, the Earth's pole, the magnetic field of the Earth, is changing shape and deranging right now. It could flip into another polarity, as it does every 500,000 years. During the process of the flip, the magnetic field won't be intact. What happens then to the souls? Are they freed, or what happens to them? And is this kind of thing reflected in any of the ancient knowledge that you've been studying?
Yes, the question is one which is asked often, and the answer does appear in all of the ancient texts and the treasures of the ancients. And when you say that the Earth's magnetic field flips every 500,000 years or so, it's not periodic, but yes, it's in millions of years rather than thousands. There are magnetic shifts of the sun which affect us on Earth,
yes,
which don't actually twist the Earth's magnetic field. And they happen at thousands of years intervals rather than millions. And what we know from science and what we know from the ancients is that when we get a sun's neutral sheet shift, that's where the sun's magnetic field shifts around the equator, then it affects the amount of solar wind which impinges upon the Earth from the sun. Now, the sun twists on its axis every 28 days, it spins. And we know from Mariner 2 spacecraft in 1961 and 62 that those particles travel to Earth, taking about 2 to 3 days to get here. They impinge upon the Van Allen belts of radiation around the Earth, discovered in 1957 by James Van Allen, an engineer working for NASA. An English professor, Ian Nicholson, in 1979, in his book The Sun, discovered that when these particles collide with the Van Allen belts, they go from the Earth's north pole to the south pole, up and down every 1 second. And when that happens, the magnetic field of the Earth gets squashed and pulled. And it goes up and down every 1 second, and every 7 days, as the sun spins, the magnetic field of the Earth is diminished and then enhanced, and diminished and enhanced. And if we look at cycles over thousands of years, we can see behavior which affects life quite profoundly on Earth. For example, when the 28-day rotation affects the magnetic field on Earth, it affects the pineal gland and the pituitary in females. This affects the production of melatonin, and that goes on to affect the production of estrogen and progesterone. So as the Earth's magnetic field varies every 28 days, females menstruate every 28 days. Also, when we get magnetic variance on the sun, magnetic flips, we get more or less clouds of particles. Now, if we get less particles, we get more sunlight and more X-rays colliding with the planet directly. So we get a greater degree of infant mortality because, as we all know, X-rays can cause a spontaneous abortion or miscarriage of the fetus after about 90 days usually.
And aren't there stories of periods of time in the past when there were massive numbers of miscarriages?
Oh, of course, and there's no doubt whatsoever that mass extinctions are also caused by magnetic reversals. And one of the questions I'm asked when people scratch their heads struggling to come to terms with this sort of information, and these are reasonable people, and they really do want to know the answers, but they've been told by their university lecturers that all this stuff's nonsense. They know inherently it's not nonsense, and they're trying to keep both masters happy, if you like. And they say, well, look, how can we have 6 billion people today, and we only had 2 people when the Earth so-called began with Adam and Eve around 5,000 years ago? How can you say that we've got 6 billion people now? How can they all have a piece of God in them? And I say, well, it's easy. The first 2 people, Adam and Eve, they were light beings. They were at 6 billion volts. They had light all around them. They had a halo. But as the Bhagavad Gita tells us, there's a 5,000 cycle where mankind degenerates. And that the Brahma Kumaris in India describe this cycle as a 5,000-year cycle. And they call the first 1,250 years of the cycle the Golden Age, where there was just Adam and Eve and the immediate family. There was no need to farm food. There was plenty of nuts and berries, plenty of things to eat. And they saw themselves as one loving family. But after 1,250 years, the Silver Age arrived, and there were too many people. The first family had many more children, many more offspring, and there wasn't not enough food locally to sustain them. So they started to emigrate, to go to different countries looking for food. Now we know that the solar wind and the sun's magnetic fields mutate fetuses in the womb, in localized areas of the Earth, geographical areas.
Yeah, when the solar wind reaches the surface of the planet, which it does from time to time, but it must be almost random. Is it, or?
Oh, it's not just that. We can get a burst of X-rays from the sun, which may only last 3 minutes. So only a small footprint on the sunward side of the Earth would be bombarded by those X-rays, and then the X-rays would stop. So the sun, the part of the Earth facing the sun at that very moment would receive ionizing radiation. All those people and animals and insects pregnant at that time would undergo genetic mutations. A quantum jump in genetic engineering would take place within them. And they, instead of being white people, they would turn into black people or yellow people or brown people. So as the first family migrated geographically, they came under different bombardment from X-rays and solar radiation. And so we have the different civilization, not the different civilization, but the different types of man started to appear. After 2,500 years, we enter the Copper Age. And in the Copper Age, there's not enough food left. So mankind starts to eat animals, and they farm animals, and possess animals, and fence them, and farm them. And for the first time, man starts to eat living flesh, and so he becomes impure. And all of this period, from the Golden Age, the voltage of each soul is going down and down. And in the Iron Age, the last 1,250 years of this cycle, we're all at war, we're all killing each other. Our soul voltage has fallen to such a level now that instead of seeing ourselves as souls with bodies, if you like, as drivers with automobiles, now the automobiles are driving around without drivers.
Right.
People are driving around without souls.
Losing someone, a very dear teacher of mine, some many years ago told me that loss of contact with the soul is loss of contact with humanity, and on the other side of that, they begin to turn into animals again.
Well, indeed, and this is what the Hindu believe, that if our soul voltage gets very low, then we can come back as animals and insects.
Right.
And in fact, if we start to look at mechanisms in the soul world, which is this is all knowledge from the decoded treasures of the ancients, by the way. I don't lie awake and make this stuff up. But what we're told
That's what makes it so fascinating, what you do, and it's why the Terracotta Warriors is such an awesome book. But we'll get a little bit more into the warriors and what is encoded in them in a minute. But I'm just so enthralled by this. Just keep going. Keep going.
Where was I, Whitley?
Well, we were okay. But let me ask you a question that's been sort of burning in my mind as we've been talking, and that is this: as this process continues, and souls get each time they return here, it gets essentially harder for them to ascend. And what happens at the end of a cycle? What happens to the souls that are still living in the physical world?
Well, what we find is if we look at the lid of Palenque, that's the coffin lid that covered the tomb of Lord Paikal, and we look at the more than 100 pictures and moving pictures it contains, we actually, I know this sounds quite remarkable, but, as I say, I invite listeners to have a look at the website. There's just one picture from the amazing lid of Palenque, but there are 100. These are the original pictures of God, the original videos of creation. And they tell us that as the sun's magnetic field flips, the Earth can turn on its axis. Now, we know this because on the last magnetic twist, when the Maya civilization began their recording of time in 3113 BC, which incidentally was thousands of years before the Mayas actually appeared on the Earth, they began their calendar in 3113 BC, and they called it the birth of Venus, because at that time the sun's magnetic field twisted. Venus toppled upside down on its axis, and now Venus spins in the opposite direction to all the other planets. Venus is also synonymous with purity, because it's the brightest and purest of the heavenly bodies. And also it's also connected with spiritual leadership. For example, in the Bible, on the last page of the Bible, Jesus says, "I am Venus, I am the bright and morning star." And when we look at the decoded treasures from the amazing lid of Palenque in Mexico, Lord Paikal tells us the same story. He says, when I die, I will go to Venus. I will become the planet of love and purity. Now, what we're told is that when the sun's magnetic field flips, sometimes Venus flips, sometimes the Earth flips, sometimes both flip. It depends on the strength of the magnetic flip, and because Venus is closer to the sun than we are. Now, clearly, when Venus flipped the last time, we didn't. But the pictures tell us that when the Earth flips on its axis, the Earth is destroyed through hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, and civilization is completely wiped out. Then all souls leave the bodies. Some souls go to God, the good souls. the partially good souls go to purgatory, where the heart is purged of sin. And again, these are all in pictures from the Amazing Light of Palenque.
Now, what happens there?
They're called between... It seems that the soul has to go through a purging process. And in the mythology of the Mayas, the souls are rounded up by the goddess of hearts. And she was the blue bottle, also known as the goddess of filth, because she was a blue bottle fly that lived in the underworld. Mm-hmm. And she collected the sinners and rode into the underworld with them on her back. There, the sinners confessed their sins to priests, and that their hearts were purged and became light, and the voltage increased to such a level that they either went on to heaven or they came back to Earth again during the next cosmic cycle, once all the dust is settled, if you like.
Now, what happens to those that go to heaven?
It would seem that if we look at all of the teachings together from all of the religions and all of the spiritual teachers, that the individuality, which is the soul, becomes one with God again. The electromagnetic energy of the soul merges with the soul of God, and we have everlasting life. Now, there does seem to be a mechanism whereby the soul can become a star. It can transform itself into a star in the sky, because, after all, a star is electromagnetic energy, and, of course, our own star, hydrogen, is converted to helium. And
that's very interesting that you say that, because one of the only places I've ever heard that was in my own childhood, when I was having these series of remarkable experiences I wrote about in a book called The Secret School, and one of the things that was mentioned was that we could become stars. So that's fascinating to have heard that from two such different directions. We're coming up to the break just now. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Maurice Cotterell. His new book, The Terracotta Warriors, fabulous stuff. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Maurice Cotterell. We're talking about his book, The Terracotta Warriors. And Maurice has basically gone around the world, from Central America to South America to Egypt, now to China, discovering that that there is a consistent message about the nature of the human being, the nature of the soul, and what we need to do to save our souls in the context of an ever-cycling and changing world. I'd like to ask you now a little bit more detail about the importance of the Terracotta Warriors themselves.
Archaeologists suggest that the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, who ruled in 220 BC, built himself a pyramid and a mausoleum within the pyramid, and surrounded himself with 700,000 life-size warriors to protect him in the afterlife. But of course, the warriors were made of clay, so they couldn't offer much protection. When we mention this to archaeologists, they say, well, maybe they were put there to scare away tomb robbers. But the fact that they were never discovered for 2,200 years after they were buried shows that they couldn't have scared away many people anyway. I mean, clearly, if you wanted to frighten people, you wouldn't bury them so effectively. So
yes.
Clearly there has to be another logical reason as to why 700,000 conscripts labored for 10 years to produce 8,099 soldiers that weigh half a ton each. Now, if we go to the pits in Xi'an, the story begins in 1974 with 3 farmers digging a well for water in a field, and they punctured the roof of an underground tunnel system with their well. Quite suddenly, all 3 of them disappeared into nowhere, and a big bellow of dust emerged from this hole into the morning sky. When they collected themselves and picked themselves up and dusted themselves off, they looked around, and they were surrounded by these massive, awesome army of soldiers. Terrified, they clambered out of the well using the drill and the tripod and the buckets that had fallen into the well with them. They ran to the nearby town to get the archaeologists to come and have a look at what they discovered. The archaeologists immediately sealed the site, and it remained sealed for 2 years until 1976. As they began to excavate this particular pit, which they called pit number 1, because they actually found 4 pits in the years that follow, and this was just the first one. In pit number 1, they found 7,029 troops in formation, and they've done excellent work in documenting them and putting the ranks of the soldiers down and so on. Then they found pit number 2, followed by pit number 3 and pit number 4. They don't, apart from the regular, remarkable sort of eighth wonder of the world, awesome, amazing understanding or feelings they've got about these warriors. They can't explain why they were put here, but what they did notice was that they all had similar face shapes. In fact, they noticed just 10 different face shapes of the soldiers out of all of the thousands of soldiers. And then another of the archaeologists noticed that of those 10 face shapes, every face shape correlated with a Chinese character of their
I have to tell you, Maurice, this is what you're about to hear. As I read this in the book, I goosebumps went over my body because this is such a brilliant insight on Maurice's part. Go ahead, Maurice.
The archaeologists noticed these 10 characters, and I mean, I'm not a scholar of Chinese language, but I'll let you know what the 10 were. They were Mu, Young, Feng, Yor, Guo, Ri, Shen, Tian, Jia, and Ji. Now, interestingly, the archaeologists went no further. If you look at all the books, if you go down to China, go down to Xi'an, have a look in all the archaeological books, the English ones and the Chinese ones. They show you the 10 face shapes, they show you the 10 characters next to them, and the similarity is remarkable. But they don't tell you what they mean. So I got the characters, I set them down, I went to the library, I got a dictionary from Hong Kong University, and I looked through the 10,516 characters in the dictionary. I located the 10 characters that the archaeologists had determined, and I started to put the English words next to them, the Chinese characters. And the first one was mu, and in English it means focus the eye or attention on a thing or a person. The second word, young, means a tunnel or a covered corridor or passageway. The third word, feng, means incant, read with intonation, or see a point by clever analogy. The fourth one, yor, means a story or course of events, how something happened. Guo means a country, a nation, or national treasures.
Maurice, I hate to interrupt, but we've got to stop just for a moment. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Maurice Cotterell. Okay, keep going, if you will, with this fascinating litany of the meaning of these letters.
The sixth face shape that they documented was Ri, and that means the sun. And then came Shen, which was number 9 in the Chinese 12-year archaeological cycle. And number 9 is the number of God. It's the highest number that we can count to before getting 1 with God the Creator. The next face was Tian, and that means the mind considered as ground for cultivation. The next one, Jia, means the first, in the beginning. And the final one, Ji, means up to a period of time, up to now. Now, if we juggle those English interpretations up, we come out with an expression. Focus the eye on the soldiers in the covered tunnels. Read the meaning of the national characters differently. Use the mind to understand the story which spans from the beginning of time until now, a story about the sun and God. So there we have it. They're telling us, look at the soldiers in more detail. There's more to them than meets the eye. And when we start to look at the soldiers in detail, and we keep in mind the super science of the sun, and the higher teachings of spirituality that we learned from the Mayas, the Peruvians, and the Egyptians, we find encoded information in the battle formation, in the shapes of the hands, in the tunic dots on the armor, in the shapes of the faces, which we've just discussed, and in the hairstyles themselves.
That's
If we
fascinating.
look at the battle formations, for example, in pit number 1, there are 7,029 troops. Now, if we look at the troops along the sides and the tops, we come out with the same number of troops as in the book of Revelation, 666. If we go to pit number 4, then what we see, pit number 3, what we see is that there are, pit number 2, there are 999 troops in formation, which is the opposite of 666, which is 999, which is the same number worshipped by the Mayas and Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun was buried
as the number of. What is the number of?
9.
I know,
999.
I know, but what does it symbolize?
It symbolizes the highest number that can be reached. It's the number of a super god, a super teacher, a spiritual teacher who comes to earth to tell us of the higher orders of science and spirituality. 9 is the highest number that can be reached before becoming 1. And it's the opposite of 666, the mark of the beast or the body in Revelation.
So the 999 is basically the highest number before you become one with God.
Exactly.
And this is the number would be the number of Christ. It would be the number of Quetzalcoatl.
It is.
Viracocha.
It is.
Yes.
Now, the reason I say that is because in the Bible it says the mark of the beast is 666, which we generally interpret to mean the mark of the body. And as we've discussed, the body is the devil. So
Right.
the opposite of the body is God, which must be 999. If we turn 666 inside out and upside down, we come out with God. Now, one of the problems when we get cosmic destruction, when we get earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and so on through a cosmic catastrophe, is that all the information is lost. So if you want to encode this knowledge, you've got to make sure it can withstand the ravages of time in years to come. That means the storms, the earthquakes, the volcanic eruptions, and so on. So it's no good encoding this information in words. For example, if the Mayas had encoded the information in the quiche of the Maya of 750 AD, none of the modern-day Mayas who speak Spanish would be able to understand it. So aware of this problem of invasions and how conquests can impose different languages in different areas of the world, they made sure that the message was a universal message. So they chose pictures and numbers because, at the end of the day, a picture speaks 1,000 words and it means the same in every language. And at the end of the day, even after the earth is destroyed, mankind gets up again and starts to walk on his 2 feet and count with his 10 fingers. So the base 10 system, the decimal system, is common to all civilizations. So if you are going to leave this information, it's important that you encode it either in pictures or numbers. And what we see is in the troop formations of the Terracotta warriors, the numbers reflect the same numbers we find in the Bible and in the treasures of the other civilizations. For example, 666, the mark of the beast, 999, the number of God, 144,000, the number of those which will go to heaven. And interestingly, the birth of Venus, which was 1,366,560 days. Now, the Mayas worshipped this particular period of 3,740 years because they knew that if the Earth was destroyed in 3113 because of the sun's radiation, lack of fertility, that's what happened, as well as this magnetic twist, it affected fertility on Earth. What happened then, that the Mayas knew it would happen again in 750 AD. They knew that they would be wiped out in 750 AD because the sun's radiation would fail to stimulate the pituitary gland in females, there would be less estrogen and progesterone, and the Maya civilization declined. Now, at that time, civilizations all around the world declined, but only the Maya disappeared almost completely. That's because we had an increase in X-rays at that time, which affect the equatorial regions greater. And we also, at such moment, get a mini ice age on Earth. So when the sun's magnetic field reverses, we get lower temperatures, and those with marginal rainfall, like in Peru and Mexico, they suffer from drought and crop failure. So they have a triple whammy. They have no fertility, higher infant mortality, and they have crop failure and drought. So as we start to look at all of the information and put it all together, it's very important for the ancient civilizations to put it down so we can understand it, so they could, if they reincarnated in years to come, they could decode the meaning of all of these characters. Now, all of the messages. Now, if we look, for example, in at the Maya system of counting the calendar numbers, instead of 30 days for a month and 7 days for a week, 365 days for a year, 100 years for a century, 1,000 years for a millennia, they threw all that out of the window. They had their own system. They counted in cycles of 20 days, 260 days, 360 days, 7,200 days, and a 144,000-day period. So if they wanted to describe...
Interestingly enough, it's the same number as the number of souls that go to heaven.
No, that's 144,000, don't forget. The birth of Venus number was 1,366,560. Now, what we find is, if you multiply those cycles by 9, that's 9 of 144,000, 9 of 7,200, 9 of 360, 9 of 260, 9 of 20, you come out with the birth of Venus number 1366560. So by using their anachronistic and enigmatic calendar cycles, the Maya were trying to tell us about magnetic reversals on the sun. And if we go to pit number 3 in Xi'an, the Terracotta warriors, what we find is that there are 68 soldiers. There's one missing, a general, because we'd either expect 666, 999, 69, 96. So if we get 68, we know there's a problem. It's not an esoteric number. Even archaeologists admit there must be somebody missing because there's no commander. Now, if we look at the troops and start to decode the soldiers in the pit and the meaning of them, what we get is, if we count the soldiers, we get this number 2340 twins, because there are two soldiers holding hands and kissing each other, if you like. Now, people would say, well, what's the point of that? What does it mean? Well, I understand what it means. The twins, when it's referred to in ancient texts, almost always refers to Venus, the morning star and the evening star, the twin planet. Venus orbits the sun every 584 days, as seen from Earth. 2,340 revolutions of Venus, 2340 twins, comes to 1366560. The same number from the Mexican pyramid is in the tombs, the formations at Xi'an.
Good Lord.
Now, these cuts, you see, it's the
awesome.
same information, but very cleverly in a different way.
Yes.
It's just so different. You really need to know why the Mayas monitored Venus, why they worship Venus, why Jesus came back as Venus. Because, of course, Jesus is telling us that he is Venus. And, of course, Tutankhamun, when you have a look at the paintings on his tomb, 1 minute he's shaking his hand with Nut, the goddess of the night sky. Then next to that, there's a picture of two Tutankhamons embracing Osiris. You've got two twins.
Yes.
Tutankhamun turns into twins. He becomes Venus and joins Osiris in the heavens for resurrection and everlasting life.
The man of resurrection. The book has never been written that is just about the man of resurrection. Maurice, we've got just barely a minute left together. Where do we stand in terms of another coming catastrophe in regard to the sun?
My investigations show that there are no solar magnetic reversals that can be expected in the near future. The next one's in about the year 4000 or thereabouts. Now, the Mayas tell us, however, that they expected, in the year 2012, they expected men to be without offspring, in other words, infertility, and for there to be drought and crop failure through starvation through drought and crop failure.
Which would be consistent with...
a magnetic reversal.
Yeah, on Earth, with the solar wind reaching the surface of the Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, that's what the Mayas say, and they say that in the books of Chile and Balaam. It's the only reference I've actually seen it written down.
Well, it's interesting because the magnetic field of the Earth is deranging right now, Maurice, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time together. This has been just a luminous experience. That's all I can say. And if you want to get more into this, and obviously you will want to, get the Terracotta Warriors from the unknowncountry.com store and visit Maurice's website, mauricecotterell.com. That's mauricecotterell.com. One of the great thinkers and seers of our age. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she has an absolutely extraordinary report for us. Dr. Dan Burrish's first-hand account of his encounters with J-Rod at Area 51, his alleged alien encounters there, and it is far more extraordinary and believable than you can possibly imagine until you've heard it. There will be sound quality problems, but listen up. It's worth listening to every word. Here she is from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
It's been since September 2002 that computer analyst and UFO phenomenon investigator Bill Hamilton has talked to me about the frustrations of microbiologist Danny B. Burrish, Ph.D., who has worked in black projects for the United States government since 1986. Dr. Burrish decided to be a whistleblower in 2002, and he whistle blew to Bill Hamilton because he did not want to do biological weapons research that he was asked to do by what he called his MJ-12 or Magi Committee superiors. Dan Burrish is a microbiologist who received his Ph.D. from the State University of New York, Stony Brook, in 1989. He is 40 years old now, born on February 2nd, 1964. His birth certificate name, officially, is Danny B. Crane, and I show a portion of his birth certificate at EarthFiles.com in a 3-part report now at the top of the headlines page. In 1990, he married Deborah K. Burrish, who had a child from a previous marriage. 5 years later, in 1995, Dan legally changed his last name from Crane to Burrish to match the child's legal last name. I have met and talked with his mother, Dodie Crane, and Dan about that name change, which they confirm. Back in 1989, as Danny B. Crane graduated from SUNY Stony Brook with a Ph.D. in microbiology and molecular genetics, Dan had already been employed by the U.S. Navy's DoD Naval Research Laboratory since 1986, before he had completed his Ph.D. His rank was captain and his title microbiologist 4. In 1992 to 1994, Dr. Burrish was assigned to work in an underground laboratory at S4 Area 51, 5 floors down underground, beneath the Papoose Mountain installations at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. That 5th floor is accessible only by one secure elevator. Dr. Burrish told me he suited up in the 5th floor underground lab like an astronaut with breathing and urination hoses. His assignment was to enter a round, clean sphere filled with an atmosphere of both hydrogen, argon, and other cold gases that housed an entity that was referred to as extraterrestrial by his government superiors. According to Dr. Burrish, his boss reported to a Magi Committee, an extension of the Majestic 12 Special Studies Group organized by President Harry S. Truman in 1947. Majestic 12 included top scientific, military, and business leaders asked to study the extraterrestrial phenomenon. Dr. Burrish says the being at S4 Area 51 was called J-Rod, J-Rod. The name emerged when the being pointed at the J key on a computer keyboard and then at a hyphen-like or inertia symbol on another key. Telepathically, the being communicated that those symbols were equivalent to the number 15 in hieroglyphics, similar to Egyptian. 15, the being telepathed, was an appropriate name for him because it was the number of light years from Earth to a base planet important to his civilization that we call now Gliese 876c, that orbits the Sun, that our astronomers have called Gliese 876. So the majestic group named the being J-Rod. Dr. Burish was told there was a serious medical problem with the J-Rod and his species, and that MJ-12 wanted Dan to extract tissue from the being's arm for microscopic study. A serious peripheral neuropathy was diagnosed, and Dr. Burish said that he collected more than 300 tissue samples in an effort to study the J-Rod's nerve damage and to perhaps develop a treatment. Dr. Burish became upset by what he was learning, and in a whistleblowing effort, he began to leak information to Bill Hamilton in the summer and fall of 2002. That year, Bill played audio-taped and videotaped interviews for me of Dr. Burish talking about his microbiology research of the extraterrestrial being's neuropathy and a complicated threat that has come to be known as the time-convergent paradox. Today, Dr. Burish has been diagnosed with a heart condition. He negotiated a deal with his government handlers to retire on June 1st, 2004, from official service to MJ-12, but continues to do some of the work that he loves and reports to the government, but is no longer, as he says, under their thumb. But Dr. Burish told me that he has kept insisting to his government superiors that the public deserved to know that by December 2012, the uncorrected J-Rod problem could mean a disaster for Earth and humanity. Dr. Burish began to explain to Bill Hamilton that there was actually a problem in time itself, that the time travelers were trying to correct in order to prevent a global Earth catastrophe. This convergent timeline paradox, or DCTP, Dr. Burish understood was the result of a catastrophe that had already occurred on Earth, and that the J-Rods preceded Homo sapiens, had experienced a terrible global nuclear war and or cosmic destruction that split the Earth's timeline into two branches that began to circle on each other. In one timeline branch, the DNA-damaged J-Rods would evolve toward their eventual extinction and appear to us as what is known as a form of gray alien. On the other timeline branch, another group of original humans would evolve physically and spiritually stronger as a blonde, Nordic-looking race based in the stars of the Orion constellation belt. If not repaired, the looping timeline problem would mean that the Earth would keep experiencing cyclic destructions unless the loop can be changed. According to Dr. Burish, our American government has been talking with the J-Rods about this problem for a long time and trying to figure out how to prevent a 2012 Earth catastrophe that would also doom the J-Rods. On June 7, 2003, Bill Hamilton was given permission by Dr. Dan Burish to videotape his descriptions of the J-Rod and the clean sphere in which the J-Rod was housed at Area 51. That videotape session was attended by 5 other researchers with their own videotape cameras. For the first time, I have permission now to excerpt long segments from the audio of that videotaped interview to share on Dreamland. Here now is Dr. Dan Burish and the voices of Bill Hamilton and some of the other people who videotaped.
In 1986, I was approached while working as an undergraduate student in Dr. Bert Belpabero's office, in his parasitology laboratory, to be exact. I was looking through a scope at the time. 3 gentlemen walked into the laboratory, closed the door behind them. There was 2 uniforms and a suit that were present. both of the uniforms I would make as well, probably being United States Navy. They asked me if I was interested in seeing the world and the like. Told them I, in fact, was. I went through several background investigations. Finally, starting up 1991 time frame, I was cleared for working past room to the Papoose mountain facility. That place that doesn't exist, about 90 miles north of here. The nowhere place. That's how I came to work there. My original assignment was at the Groom Lake facility to review histopathology slides. And I went through nearly a year's testing and then was basically let loose for a year, and I heard no contact from them. After that, I was brought back in and shown some higher grade slides of unknown origin. Following that, I was introduced into a working group and subsequently brought into the Papoose facility, the Site 4 facility. We worked for well over a year on slides of unknown origin. The slides were unusual in that they were pressurized cells, and they were reviewed by us on a conveyor with a completely automatic microscope. We weren't touching anything. We'd give verbal commands.
Now, was this under this Project Aquarius?
Yes. Initially, I was assigned as a working member of Project Aquarius. Then finally, I was made an assistant working group leader.
Now, could you explain briefly what you were briefed on who and or what J-Rod was?
Initially, I was briefed that J-Rod was an alien, specifically from the reticulum system, to reticulum 4.
Okay.
I had no idea the truth, yes, from 2 reticulum 4 now, but I had no idea the truth of how they came to be. If they had personal names, the term J-Rod simply means 15, which was a basing name for where they're located, the number of light years from our location. So they took those names, and they identified through the Sigma protocols, the linguistic protocols, with a rod symbol, which was an inertia symbol, and the letter J. And in fact, that was a combination of Mayan and Egyptian numerology having to do with a rod and a J, meaning 10 and 5 for 15.
Okay. Now, 15 light years away, you said that police
876 Charlie, from what I've been told.
How did J-Rod get here? I mean, how did he, 15 light years away?
He crashed in 63, from what I understand.
Oh, is that right?
Outside of Kingman.
Okay.
Kingman, Arizona.
Right.
There was a problem involving his physiology and his biophysiological communication with the craft went wrong. And, of course, he's ill, as we know, with the MGUS, Methaprotein-associated problems. And he crashed.
Was he transported immediately from that crash site to the export facility?
I believe he and associates were transferred separately. Originally to the Groom Lake facility.
Okay.
And an associate to, I believe, Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
I have no independent verification of where the associate went, though. All I can say is that he was there at Site 4.
Now, you interacted with J-Rod. Was there a general procedure for this interaction?
Right. Well, we would undergo a medical examination, at least during the early time frame of the introductions, the 92 time frame. 91 to 92, when we were doing introductions. We had regular, systematic medical position. Following that, we would be suited, we would be catheterized, plugged, and suited. Communication apparatus was placed on our heads. We had a cooling system set up. It was, for all intents and purposes, it was a spacesuit. It was a total encapsulated suit. Something like what you would find in a NASA facility. Not so much something that you would see, for instance, at USAMRIID or CDC. that type of level 4 suit. It was more of a regular space-type suit with joints. We were suited up, we were pressurized, and then walked with our cooling system and our hosing down a ramp into the ambassadorial suite. Following that, we were led up a gantry-way, which had been moved into position by the Queen Sphere, which had been previously rotated up to an iris through the floor. He was held actually below the ambassadorial suite level, and that was raised up as needed. What they did with him down there, he didn't say, and they didn't tell me. It was not a need-to-know issue. Apparently, they dealt with the cleaning of the sphere and all of that down there. The regular housed animal maintenance. That's the treated him. We would be led up the gantry-way. The hoses would be hooked into an interior system inside the doorway, which was exterior to the Queen Sphere. And it was called the exterior system, in fact. But when we would be let in, the door would be closed, and we would be pressurized inside of the gantry-way. Following that, there was a drum system that was set up. Once there was an equal pressurization between the gantry-way and the Queen Sphere, we would then be told to proceed forward. I would raise a hand in acknowledgement. We were not supposed to talk at the time at all because nothing verbal around the specimen, around the J-rod. Why, I was never told, but we were not supposed to talk around the J-rod. I moved the drum system and re-hooked a secondary set of hosing inside the Queen Sphere, checked the pressurization, and once that was done, the door to the Queen Sphere would be closed behind me, and I would presume that the pressurization remained the same in the gantry-way. Following that, I would do my business inside of the Queen Sphere involving contacting the J-rod and removing the samples.
And what was the reason you were removing them?
We were removing samples to attempt a treatment, a full diagnosis and a treatment for a paraprotein-related monoclonal gammopathy of uncertain significance type disorder, which had various attributes to it.
The demyelination process, okay, isn't that similar to conditions that humans sometimes have, like, what is it, muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, except for he wasn't forming plaques.
Okay.
He wasn't forming plaques. He was simply demyelinating, repairing the demyelination area with the immune system. They've got a cell-mediated immune system, humoral system, just like we have. The cells are different. They've got filopodia, but very, very strange looking blood-like material. It's like it, but that's why we use the term analog so much, because it was different.
Can you describe in detail at that time what it was like to meet the beings at that time?
My original feeling was I was looking at a giant insect. Best I can, just off the cuff. It looked like a giant insect, being dark brown and hunched in a corner, very insectoid in appearance. It almost looked like it had an exoskeleton. I felt afraid inside because I was always told that monsters weren't real. And now I find out they are, but they live in the heart of men. It was fear, excitement, complete astonishment. Because honestly, I thought we were dealing with some sort of monkey, something like an old world ape or the like. But indeed, it wasn't. That's what my feeling was. It scared the hell out of me. Where were we?
You were describing
3.5 feet, large head in comparison to the torso. So the ratio of cranial to the torso area would be larger than what we would call a modern human being. Large, bulbous black eyes. The whites of the eyes had been selected out. So it looked like large people, basically. when you look into his eyes, you feel like you're going to fall into his eyes forever. And I think that probably had something to do with the telepathic nature of his mental structure. Large arms, large length. 4 very thin, sinuous fingers, nails. He was hunched over most of the time to not support himself fully, given muscular atrophy. And that had to do with the peripheral neuropathy in which he was suffering. So he would grunt and move toward me almost in a flopping fashion. Feet were large in comparison to what we would say our feet would be.
How many toes?
Unclothed 4.
4.
And he was unclothed, which bothered him. He wanted to wear clothing and was refused at every turn. Called himself captive, and justifiably so. His feet were unusual in that his plantar area had a very large knob underneath what we would call our heel. His facial features were grotesque in comparison to what he showed me what normal would be. He was
normal of his type.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. He was bilaterally symmetrical to the extent that the disease process was not changing his facial features. Nose was recessed. Not a nose like we have, but basically two operculum, 2 orifices. An extremely small mouth. A hard palate, no teeth. I took well over, nearly 300 individualized aspiration samples from his neurological system. He would hold his arm out for me to take them. There was no pain medication, and whenever I would fire the introduction system to remove the sample, take an aspirative avulsion system, he would cry, and then he would just stand there and look at me.
There was a suction.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I would bring the sample after the initial removal from his tissues into the introduction system, and then approve it and move it from there to one of the helper biologists. Usually it was Robert, outside of the clean sphere, and then he would move it from there to be handled under our normal protocol. It was a level 5 TAPR, BMDL system. He'd just stand there and take it.
So, do you feel the communication that he established with you when you were in contact with him, could he extend this communication over any distance?
60 feet.
60 feet.
Definitely 60 feet.
Okay.
So 60 feet from the center of the clean sphere to the introduction ramp going down into the ambassadorial suite. So at least 60 feet.
Here, a cameraman asked, what is it like to communicate with one of these beings telepathically?
I could hear my voice. However, the cadence, the affect, was something that distinguished it other than me. It was no any great booming voice from the heavens or anything like that, and I'm glad I do not have a proclivity to hear voices in my head, and have heard none since. But people could probably challenge that. I could tell it was somebody other than me, and I could tell because I felt drawn toward the subject that was sending the communication. When the J-Rod spoke with me, prior to the bombardment of the images, it was something that was part of me, but not part of me. I actually felt non-resident for a moment. It was almost an OBE type feeling. And then I could feel myself pull back and experience sound. It was physical. It was more real than touching an object. And that's the only real time that I felt anything, more physical than physical.
There's a conveyance of emotion during his communication.
100% emotion. If he was upset, I could feel his pain. It got to the point where, as I was doing the needle introductions, I could feel what he was feeling. So as I would inject the needle under the integument and find my proper location prior to removing the sample, I could feel the needle entering him. So I could feel his feelings.
During his work at the S45 lab at Area 51, he was given many documents to read, and some of that information included our government's knowledge, apparently, about the civilization of these J-rods. And he was asked, what did the documents say about the J-rods?
Close-knit, very well-ordered society, one which is numerologically based, one which speaks to others that were called brothers of Orion, the Epsilon Orionis area. The Brookings Institute paper was present, as well as several position papers clarifying the Brookings Institute. However, each of these that I was allowed into, they had separate folders and they had separate clips within them inside these 3-ring binders. And I was told which numbers I was allowed to open up. And they were given to me on a card, and those are the ones that I was allowed to review. Those are the times that I was allowed to review them. I was more interested in taking in the biology issues. Just doesn't interest me. Aside from the fact that from the biophysiological interface between the hand, mind, and the craft, because they have on their hands a number of pads, and there are open nerves which are protected by various glycoproteins, and those glycoproteins are selectively pushed forward or sucked back via capillary action. Or they can be, through an active fashion, pulled back, and it kind of pulls a viscous sheath back and allows the J-rod to have direct interface with the craft. That interested me, although most of it at the time, and still some of it now, I have no understanding of.
How many beings have we had to work with?
I only met one. I'm aware of possibly 3. From the reading, and at that time, again, I was so stunned by what I was doing. A lot of it was getting by me. When I read the word extraterrestrial, I tunnel visioned. And when I finally believed and understood that it was, in fact, an extraterrestrial, no.
Why are you talking to us now? What is your intention in telling us about this, about your involvement?
Multifocal.
Okay.
It's multifocal. There's several reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The largest reason is not the most important reason. The largest reason from a personal perspective is to step out from under the Black Ops community.
Okay.
And retire. I'm ready. I told you before, I see myself walking along a pond and not being bothered by anybody except for maybe a bird here or there and taking a sample and just taking my time and looking at it for fun, for enjoyment.
And you're worried about your health, right?
Well, my health is degrading. There's no doubt about that. The heart disease that I have is in fact degrading my health. Time is coming. I don't know how long that is, and of course that's within God's providence. There are other reasons. Yes, people have a right to know. Yes, they have a right to know what is going on. They have a right to know because this is their future.
And over Memorial Day weekend in Nevada, I was able to spend several hours with Dan Burish, and I asked him if he had any clear sense of what he thinks now is going to happen in the year 2012, specifically the month of December, at least according to the information he was presented with at Area 51. And this was his answer. Linda, it could go either way, but I think there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you very much, Linda Moulton Howe.
Carvings. And they made sure it was difficult to access, difficult to decode, because the knowledge is very special. Not only does it relate to the superscience of the sun, but it also tells us about the higher orders of spirituality, why we live, why we die, what happens after the soul leaves the body, and what it's all about, what God is, what heaven is, what hell is. All the secrets have been left for us to decode. And they didn't wish us to decode this information before we were ready for it. And they made sure that we weren't ready until our technology told them that we would be ready. So they made sure that some of these messages could only be decoded using the latest technology, like computers and so on. And again, if you check the website, you'll see these amazing living miracles, which are right now unfolding over the last few years and telling us of what life's all about, why we've been born, and why we're here, and what will happen in the future.
I am actually doing this as we speak, and of course it's absolutely awesome because, you've got something, and it's so abundantly clear, and yet conventional Western archaeology, which is kind of mired down in Eurocentric thinking, in other words, by that I mean our archaeologists, without quite realizing what they're doing, assume that modern European and Western thought patterns are the most advanced that have ever been on the earth, and therefore that, for example, the animations I'm looking at right now on MauriceCotterell.com, which show clearly that it's no accident that these images appear as they do, would just be ascribed to chance.
The problem is, I think, with archaeologists is that they don't believe in the soul. That's the first thing, and this is why they have no. It doesn't concern them if they dig up dead bodies and take the jewelry off them. For them, we are biological beings. We are just bodies. There is no soul when this life is over. For them, and for them, it might well be the case that when this life is over, they they cease to be. Now, all the civilizations of the world believe in reincarnation. Now, of course, some people will contest that. They'll say, oh, hang on a second. Christianity doesn't believe in reincarnation, but it's not true. It's a different way of looking at things. And if we start back with physics regulates estrogen and progesterone in females, and hence menstruation in females, how it affects determinative personality at conception through genetic mutations, and so on. Once I started to look at these ancient civilizations of the Mayas, the Peruvians, the Egyptians in a different way, then it all became clear as to why they worship the sun as the god of astrology, why they worship the sun as the god of fertility, and why they believe that the sun has massive cycles of 18,000 years duration, during which the earth is periodically destroyed over and over again. And they wrote down all of this very super science in their treasures to help us regain the knowledge in years to come, because they understood about the body and the soul, how the soul can go to heaven or reincarnate on earth. And so they figured, well, if we don't make it to heaven, we need to somehow grasp all this knowledge again if we ever do come back to earth. So why not write it down in our treasures? So they wrote it down. The Mayas wrote it down in their carvings, their jewelry, their architecture. The Egyptians wrote it down in their architecture, their pyramids. The Peruvians, again, left the same information. And as I began to inquire into these civilizations, I began to see common threads. For example, the leaders were known as feathered snakes. For example, Tutankhamun has the eagle and the the vulture and the snake on his forehead. So he was a feathered snake to his people. Lord Pei-Kao was known as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake. And of course, if we look at the Chinese, the leader of the Chinese, the first emperor of a unified China around 220 BC, Qin Shi Huangdi, his insignia was a dragon. Now, the dragon is a feathered snake and a stag. It's an amalgam of three creatures. And Lord Pei-Kao in Mexico, as well as being known to his people as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake, he was also known as Xiaipitotec, the stag. And if we look at the pictures, if listeners have got access to the website, if they log into my website, then they'll actually see the animation.
Cotterell, his website is mauricecotterell.com.
What we'll see is, if you scroll down the page, you'll actually see the animations of some of these decoded pictures from my earlier works, how the Mayas encoded this very sophisticated information into their physics again, and astrophysics. What we realize, if we get back to Einstein's theory of relativity, where he puts forward the equation E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Once we start to examine all of this knowledge, we realize that in the beginning, if we look at the scriptures, there was light. The light, the energy converted into mass. The physical universe was created. And what that means is everything in the physical universe must be the opposite of the energy, because, going back to Einstein, if E equals mc squared, then if we take energy across the equation and convert it to mass, we have to change the sign of the mass. Simple rule of algebra. So if we have God, energy, and that's what we're told, God is light in all of the scriptures, then as God goes across that equation and created the physical universe, everything in the physical universe is the opposite of God. So everything in the physical universe must be the devil. Now, what that means is that we are living in hell. Now, that's not the end of the story. As we start to decode these ancient treasures, they tell us that when the fetus is in the womb, growing and the cells are dividing, it generates electrical currents and they generate voltages. And those voltages are opposite the voltage that created them. In other words, they're negative God, if you like, they're opposite. And what happens before the baby is born is that those voltages drag down another piece of godly energy. So the soul attaches to the baby. So
Maurice, at this point, at this incredible juncture when the soul is attaching to the baby, we have to take a brief break. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Maurice Cotterell at an extraordinary moment in the life of a human being. He was talking about the moment that a soul attaches to a baby and when we become human in the womb, a moment that was known and understood in the distant past but has been forgotten sadly by so many scientists. Maurice, just continue. This was just so awesome.
What happens then, as the ancients tell us, as we start to decode all of this information, and this is their information, of course, Whitley, not mine.
Well, UnknownCountry.com subscribers, welcome to another edition of Dreamland, free as always, and this one is just awesome. First, Maurice Cotterell has discovered something about the Terracotta warriors that is in China that you just are not going to believe. There was something amazing going on in this world in the distant past that we have forgotten, and boy, do we need to capture that thread now, because then later, when Linda talks about Dr. Dan Burish, a couple of things that he mentions that I can't say, that Linda and I both know, that have we kept dead secret all of these years. He also knows about the visitors, about their bodies, that you almost have to believe the guy has seen one. So it's quite an awesome interview. The sound quality is not great in the interview, and I apologize for that. It was taken in the field by a non-professional, not by Linda, in other words, and it shows. But listen closely. It is very, very worth hearing. It will be inconceivably the most extraordinary interview you've ever heard. And the amazing thing here is that the Terracotta warriors story, the ancient Maya story of 2012, and what J-Rod is warning us about through Dr. Burish all dovetail. They're the same thing. I mean, it's just brain-bending. So listen up, and there's no commercials in this. Do get the Terracotta Warriors, though, and there's a coupon for it, $1 off in the subscriber section. It's called Terracotta 1. And you can use it right now in the store, and it is well worth getting this book. It's a real mind expander. Also, something only people who subscribe to the free newsletter, and I have autographed 50 copies of The Key, and if you act immediately, you can get one. Of course, you get it at half price, $9.47, half off the list price. And there are just 50 copies more autographed. I'd autograph more, but I am running like a demon, as you may imagine, in the considerable wake of the day after tomorrow. There is a lot going on. A whole lot is going on. The world is changing to a degree because of that movie, and let's hope that the Climate Stewardship Act that's being reintroduced by John McCain and Joseph Lieberman passes this time, as it has now got a very good chance of doing so. We will save the world in which we live and for future generations. Wait and see. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Let's go on and talk to Maurice Cotterell. Well, one of the most exciting names in literature is that of Maurice Cotterell. Maurice has written the Mayan prophecies, the Tutankhamun prophecies, the super gods. He has written the Lost Tomb of Viracocha. He has Coming Up, the Celtic Chronicles, which should be awesome. But today we're going to be talking about his latest and many ways most amazing book, because this time Maurice goes to China to do what? Well, to look at those amazing terracotta warriors. Remember, they were found a few years ago, 8,000 life-size statues of warriors from 2,000 years ago in ancient China. Now, why and how were they made, and what were they made for? Well, Maurice's interpretation of this is going to awe you. It is going to inspire you. It is going to open your eyes to some of the realities of our lost past that you have never considered before. It is an amazing, amazing story. Maurice, I'm tempted to just dive into it. That's all I can say. We're going to be talking about things like the secret science and lost science of the sun and just all sorts of stuff. So, Maurice, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Whitley. It's good to be back again.
Well, it's always exciting to have you. Maurice, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's always exciting to have you, and I'm really looking forward to this. Why don't you begin by telling us what drew you to the Terracotta Warriors in the first place, because that in itself is a big surprise.
It is, Whitley, but as you were saying at the introduction, I've been very interested for many years in the super science of the sun. For me, it's a lifetime's work. And the ancient Chinese were one of the first civilizations to recognize the sunspot cycle and to catalogue the duration of sunspots on the surface of the sun. When I also started to realize that the ancient Mayas understood the super science of the sun, how the sun affects life on Earth, how the 28-day spinning sun